Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the show where we talk about the lessons we can learn as Dungeon Masters and as players from lessons of Critical Role. Hi, everybody.
Maybe the 1% who don't know. Tell us who you are.
Oh, I have to imagine it's more than that.
I don't know. Who are you?
I'm Super Geek Mike. I'm Mike Christensen. I have a YouTube channel called Super Geek Mike where I talk about the D&D, and I do some videos about the Critical Role. And I do the videos from the perspective of having watched the show. I think I caught up with it around the time the Briarwood arc was starting. So okay. I think when I started watching, I started from the beginning and caught up, but it was probably around the point you are now in real time, and I just wasn't caught up with it yet. But
you started watching live from there.
Pretty close to it, like maybe episode 30, maybe a little earlier.
So one of the things that we brought up is that I am watching from the very beginning, which yes. I know, in your opinion, is a terrible place to start.
Not.
I believe in your words, it was the worst answer for where to start.
No. The worst answer is the podcast from the very beginning.
Oh, I see.
The worst answer is the podcast because the podcast cuts out the intro of who you're listening to. It cuts out everything before the beginning of the game and the recap.
Yeah.
And I think mainly that's done so that they don't have any announcements. And I think I talked about this in the video. Maybe I'm repeating myself. But it's because also they knew in the future anything before the recap is ads. And,
yeah.
Or a promotion for merch that may not be in the store anymore. Because you probably don't know this. The podcast does not start until around episode 99. And they go back and they released all of Campaign 1 and like 15 episodes at a time. Because Geek and Sundry didn't do podcasts. Nerdist did podcasts. And they did not step on each other's toes. Like, I don't know if you realize this, when they did D&D Diesel, Nerdist put out like a 3-minute version of Vin Diesel playing D&D.
Yeah.
Because they did short content. And Geek and Sundry had the 15-minute version. Like, they were very careful about like what kind of content is on each of these. So like Laura Bailey was in an actual play show run by Will Wheaton on Nerdist. No, I don't think it was. I think it was on Geek and Sundry. And that was just recorded in advance, but it was, longer form things.
Right.
But Nerdist was podcasts. And Geek and Sundry, the only podcast they ever released that I know of, at least at the time, was Critical Role. And because the outcry for it was so huge.
Yeah.
Critical Role's, the demands of the fan base tends to make them the exceptions in spaces. So, for example, for a long time, the only non-Wizards of the Coast thing on D&D Beyond was Matt Mercer's Blood Hunter.
Oh,
that was the only thing that had to come from the DM's Guild and appeared on D&D Beyond itself.
Yeah.
Nothing else did. And then later, they folded in things from Taldor Reborn, and then finally now the book is on there.
Yeah.
As are now they're putting in other, like Ghostfire Gaming has books on D&D Beyond now as of like a week ago or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, well, I know for a long time the only non-Wizards source book on there was Wildmount.
Well, no, Wildmount is a Wizard source book. They teamed up for that one.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
Gosh, this is a convoluted web.
But they were the exception. They were always the exception.
Yeah.
Because there was the outcry for it.
Yeah.
So because they sort of batch did these podcasts, they don't have anything from after Matt calls the game, and they don't have anything before he starts the recap. So for episode 1, when you just start hearing 8 voices, including Matt Mercer, you don't know who anyone is. It's very
disorienting.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, like how we have. It's troubling starting from episode 1, regardless of if it's the podcast or the live show, because we are just thrust right into the action. And we have no idea. We have those little, on the video they're blurred out, the segments of the character backstories, but those don't cover even a fraction of what happens. Happened.
And coming up, they will do a video that recaps everything that happened before the live stream. That comes out for the last video of the year, so like episode 30 6, I think.
One of the things that I've talked about with Matt Mercer's style is it's even more chaotic than my own style. He's got he really encourages a lot of rolling in places that I would probably not encourage it. And I think that is just like some people like that more, I would call it a high chaos sort of game. It's much more dramatic. It's much more, intense. But then there is the other side of it it is much more ambiguous. One of the things I really like out of D&D, and something that crunchier games provide a lot more of, is it feels more like a challenge and a puzzle. Of like, I go into a situation, I know all the rules, like I can figure out, because I know exactly how the world will react to my mechanics, I have a much better handle on my options within a scenario.
Well, and this is a really now we're starting to talk about the nature of how Critical Role works and all that stuff.
Yeah.
His style changes across that first year. His style, he starts really leaning into more rules as written, but it's not an immediate switch because he doesn't know the rules yet, first of all.
Certainly.
But it's just the pressure of Twitter and of Twitch and of YouTube comments. It's just the pressure of like all these people. And I'm sure there's part of it is people saying you're getting it wrong. Part of it is, I've never played before. How does this work?
Right.
And now you're realizing you're the ambassador, which certainly they did not. Let me rephrase. They wanted to be able to show people that anyone could play D&D, right? That cool people could play D&D. That people who look like Travis could play D&D, and we'll come back to that later. Remind me to talk about that later.
Yeah, certainly.
But this very quickly became a way that people introduced the game to people. It wasn't just how they got introduced to it. It was they were onboarding others through it. Right. And I think, and I can't speak to what aspect or how much, but we watched Matt start getting much more rules written to the point where later on, and this is something that, you and I were talking about a little bit offline, but the part of the Marisha backlash comes from her quote unquote not knowing the rules and not knowing the spells,
which a lot of people didn't. At the point that I'm watching, I think everyone has had moments, and Marisha has had maybe a higher percentage of moments. But
Marisha has a higher percentage because she has more spells. Right? Outside of Tiberius, she is the most spells.
Yeah, Druid is a really hard, and if we even compare like Sorcerer and Druid is a prepared caster. So not only does she have more or as many spells as Tiberius, but she has to know every spell available to her, not just the ones that she knows at the time.
And there's a couple facets to this. One is, people watching and being like, well, why doesn't she know every rule? I'm someone who knows every rule. You are also someone who's reacting to Critical Role in comments and watching Critical Role in your free time, which Cast does not do. You're talking about D&D on Reddit. You're, talking about D&D on Twitter. You're doing the things that Cast does not do. You're a different type of nerd than them. Yeah, you know the rules differently than them.
It's hard to think
they jumped in 8th level.
Yeah. I think it's hard for audience members to think about that the people that they are watching do their hobby and that they really like aren't as into the hobby as they are.
But the other thing I was going to say about Marisha's spells is that she's coming from games where I suspect Matt was a little more freeform about what a spell could and couldn't do. And as you said, that creates a culture of like, can the spell do this? I don't know. Let's talk about it. Yeah. As opposed to a very clear yes or no, which means you have to relitigate it every time the topic comes up. But once he becomes a hardline rules as written person mid-campaign, when they have cast different spells or similar spells in different ways, there's an adjustment period to that.
Yeah.
So it causes friction, which makes it seem like she's the one who doesn't know her spells.
Right.
And sometimes she's doing the thing that we all do, which is looking at the title and being like, oh, can I do this? And then everyone has to be disappointed when they find out that's not how the spell works.
Yeah.
Not the only person who's ever done that.
Yeah.
But sometimes it used to be possible for the spell to do something like that,
Yeah. There are several times where, like, and this isn't even a critique of Tiberius. He used telekinesis a lot. Telekinesis is a cool spell. But there's a moment during the airship fight when they're on their way to Vasselheim where he starts throwing daggers with the telekinesis. And I'm like, whoa, that's cool. Telekinesis can't do that. And someone had to tell me, like, oh, it could do that in Pathfinder. Right. Which is a whole other layer to that conversation of, like, they have similarly named spells.
I don't remember if it's happened yet. I think it has. It may not have. But there's a moment when, maybe it's coming up, Keyleth casts heat metal on Vax's daggers. And they burn him. Because Matt's like, oh, you burned Vax. And Vax is like, that's fine. Let it. Because Liam's policy is play it where it lies. Let's keep moving, you know. Yeah. And Keyleth, Marisha has to, as she's sort of like, oh, that's how it worked in Pathfinder. We used to do that with Grog a lot. That's why. And it's like, oh, well, you know, it may have been nice if Matt had told you in the middle, like, hey, this is what's going to happen. And he gets better about that. I think he will get better. And this is something I know you're keying on a lot right now.
Well, it's something I wanted to ask.
Why didn't Matt tell the players what the potential consequence was going to be? I think he gets better about that.
Okay.
You know, I mean, let's be fair. We are now at the point where people think the show is scripted because everyone is so on the same page. So they will get there.
That's fair. Because that is one of the questions I had later is I don't want to call it like player backlash is the wrong word, but there are segments, and one of the ones that comes to mind immediately is when Tiberius casts fly on everyone. And then later during the same sequence, he casts some other concentration spell. And it was a conversation that him and Matt had been having a lot about these concentrations and how that item worked, which, by the way, that item is insane.
Again, I think that is... Well, like, you know, I wonder, too. I don't know if concentration I don't know how concentration worked in Pathfinder, so I don't know if that item would be better fit for Pathfinder, or if that item is meant to sort of like get them closer to what they used to be able to do with Pathfinder. Like, I don't know. Yeah. But I think that is very much you don't know what game you're designing for yet magic item. You know, which is true for, I think, a lot of the magic items that you will have seen introduced at this point that are not straight out of the DMG.
I mean, some of them are really cool.
A lot of some of the ones in Gilmore's are just straight out of the DMG.
Yeah.
But anything original that you've seen at this point, I wonder if he knew what system he was designing for. He's starting to get there. Like by the time you get to the end of the Briarwood arc, I'm thinking of specifically a magic item that gets introduced where I'm like, that feels more 5e. You know, we can split hairs on mechanics and specific details, but like the risk reward, the balance of it, there's just the very nature of it feels more appropriate to 5e. But obviously just the number of magic items they have, it always depends on everyone's individual campaign, but especially the power of all the magic items that they have at this point. Like, Vox Machina is a much higher level magic game than I currently run. Yeah. You know, and in many other ways, Vox Machina is like my favorite Critical Role campaign.
Yeah. Really?
But so for me, this is the way that I put it, and you haven't gotten to it yet, so you haven't experienced what I'm going to describe as much, but my favorite arc is the one after the Briarwood arc.
Okay.
But the Briarwood arc is really good as well, and they both kind of speak to this. Vox Machina is telling stories that we've all seen before. It's just doing it really, really well.
Okay, sure.
In that way, it reminds me of the movie Tangled, which is, I'm sorry, the best Disney movie. Because it's the one that has learned the lesson from almost 100 years of movies, and is like, okay, what if we do the best version of this? Yeah. You know, what is the most refined version of this formula? Campaign 2 is Frozen. Because that's when they really start trying to change. Really starting to deviate and do something different. You know, basically what happens is we get really dramatic sequences through all of Campaign 1, but they're all playing archetypes. Yeah. Campaign 2, they're all like, ooh, what if we can get this really meaty, dramatic juice, and they all create characters that are designed for that, and they're all much more different and much more unique and much harder to sort of define based on like an archetype that we've all seen before. I mean, Scanlan is literally based off of his character art pre-livestream was just the Pathfinder Bard art, you know. And they started in 4E. So he was just he was that archetype. Yeah. Vax and Vex are in every player's handbook. You know, some version of Grog is in every player's handbook.
Yeah.
But Keyleth and Percy are kind of the most afield because they were the most experienced players.
Yeah.
And specifically, they'd played campaigns with Matt before. I don't know if they'd played with each other, but they definitely played with Matt before. And so they are the most sort of developed. I mean, Percy just feels like he stepped out of an anime.
Yeah.
And Elif is accidentally the Avatar.
Yeah.
So
I heard it was less accidental than all that.
No. She has said that she has said, I believe, that it was accidental.
Okay.
Not regretted,
Yeah.
but not necessarily completely intentional.
Gotcha.
I don't know. The fact that her second character is a lot like Korra is much more accidental.
I see. Either way, I think I totally hear what you're saying of like Grog is like he is like the fundamental like dumb guy barbarian. But
he's the big dumb tattooed bald strong guy. He's Drax a couple years before he became famous. He's Kratos before Kratos actually grew the beard. You know, he looks like Grog grew a beard before Kratos. Just putting that out there. but
he had to roll to do it.
But there's a reason why some people love Frozen and some people love Campaign 2.
Yeah.
Because the themes that they're going for and the things that they're doing with their characters and the sort of challenges and the drama is much more what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm the one who's kind of like, ooh, but it would have been kind of nice if you'd fix these narrative problems and you got them all totally right for Campaign 1, because Campaign 1 is so archetypal.
Yeah.
So that's where my bias is.
No, I completely hear that. I mean, I love, like, I talk all the time. Like, I think that one of the things that is really cool is that they chose maybe traditionally harder archetypes and then nailed them. Like, the strong dumb guy is something that I think a lot of us have had at the tables that is a lot of the times really dumb and cringe. Like, it's like not played very well. But Travis plays Grog beautifully. And even the Sun Tree that I just saw, like that moment doesn't do any subversions. It doesn't like really like do anything super novel, but it just does this fear and like political, I wouldn't even call it political intrigue, but like, you know, this vampire nobility.
Dark horror.
Gothic horror. Yeah, that it does that gothic horror just really nails it with that Sun Tree sequence of like, there's nothing surprising there other than how good it is, and that is surprising in and of itself.
The fact that it is not Percy's family, which is what everyone
That's exactly what I assumed it would be. Yeah.
One of the things that I think about, especially because like just the other day, you know, I was preparing dinner and I pulled up your stream and it was like, you know, the body of a rotund bald man dangling. I was like, oh, I'm there for the bright scene, which is the Sun Tree scene.
Yeah.
But the and I went back and finished the whole thing later. But
thank you.
that scene is the moment when Critical Role becomes what it's going to become.
So a lot of people said, yeah.
Let me put it this way, because let me back into it from another direction. On the Adventure Zone, you know, the Adventure Zone is a comedy actual play show. It has some really dramatic moments later on, but something they talk about is you know, behind the scenes and like about the experience was like it was just something they did to fill in. They needed something to do to have a bonus episode when Justin went on paternity leave. Justin McElroy, one of the hosts.
Right. When they were
for their other show, My Brother and Me.
Right. Yeah.
And so they did this, and they were like, "Oh, this is a fun concept. Let's spin it off into its own thing."
Yeah.
And so they played through an abridged version of Lost Mine of Fandelver. And sorry, bear with me. I don't live stream as often as you, so I need to
go for it.
Wet my whistle.
That's why I have water breaks.
But there's a moment in the end of the first arc, which is, you know, an altered version of the Wave Echo Cave encounter, where they talk about, they're like, it felt like for us, we had been building this car, and that was the moment we found out it could fly. Like, all of a sudden, this could go somewhere we had never expected.
Yeah.
And it's a great analogy. But the moment itself is just a joke.
Yeah.
It was literally Justin McElroy casting Magic Missile and shouting "Abraca fuck you," and that to them was like a huge moment. Like, oh my god, we've hit gold, which is so funny considering there's so much better stuff on that show. That for me, I'm like literally the death scene of the victim he kills is so much funnier to me than that.
Yeah.
Because he just like falls down a pit and just keeps falling forever, and then he just lies there dying for like 2 uninterrupted minutes. which to me that's the moment. But
Yeah.
teach their own.
Yeah.
The moment that Critical Role finds out the car can fly is the Sun Tree.
Yeah.
It's the moment they realize that what they've been building has a lot more potential than they expected. It can go to places, and I don't mean to say that they hadn't gone to dark places before.
Sure.
But the way that hit, just for some reason, I think is the moment. And there's arguably other moments. Keela's tearful speech with Kima, or her tearful speech in the Cinder Grove when she's on her Aramente, I think are both important scenes.
Yeah.
The guest star interactions, the Burt Reynolds with the dragon, like those are really great moments that clearly resonated. I mean, hell, the fact that they were able to sell out of 100 t-shirts before they finished announcing them, that's clearly a moment where that car can fly.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But for the narrative potential,
yeah,
I think the reason why we think of the Briarwood arc as the way it is starts with the Sun Tree.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably, the encounter with the Briarwoods as well. There's some great moments in that as well. But the Whitestone arc,
I think that the really interesting thing about that is that there had been heartwarming things before. So like I think that both of those Keyleth scenes are very heartwarming, and I think that is a more, I don't necessarily want to call it common, but I think that's the best word for it. I think that is a more common feeling at home games. Even just Pike leaving is very heartwarming, and that is a feeling that we have all, I think, accessed at our games because we naturally care about these. We develop a level of like investment with these characters, and so I think it's easier to access that heartwarming feeling. I think it is harder to access dread. Especially like with D&D. I mean, D&D 5e is much more is much less maybe fatal than older editions. So I think that people aren't always as worried about their characters dying, especially when there's Revivify and True Resurrection and whatever. So I think
or Reincarnate, best spell in the game.
Yeah. So I think it is incredibly hard to access that level of dread in your games. And that Sun Tree scene, like I was talking about with chat, I was like, I don't think I could have done that. There are a lot of moments with Matt Mercer where I'm like, okay, I kind of get it. Like, I think he has amazing dramatic timing, but I was like, a lot of this other stuff I could accomplish, and I think, frankly, I could do some of it better. But that Sun Tree scene, I was like, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do it.
Matt Mercer, and I'm thinking of some specific moments from late in the Vox Machina campaign. Matt Mercer has the ability to turn into John Doe from Seven. He can unlock a part of himself that is... John Doe is the serial killer in Seven. Okay. Is the name of the character.
Oh, okay.
Played by famously delightful man Kevin Spacey.
Famously, yeah.
But which is a spoiler because he's not in the opening credits.
Oh, okay.
But that movie came out in 1995. So
I don't care.
it's a very good movie because he does some that is a disturbing movie, and Matt Mercer has given him a run for his money a couple times, and the Sun Tree is up there.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a level of confidence that helps in moments like that, where he knows that he has the attention of his players, and his players are really good listeners. Not always. I'm watching episode 48 right now. There's some moments of not amazing listening in that one. I mean, honestly, in episode 46 when they have a guest star or who's just a little distracting at times as well. So it happens. Yeah. But overall, he has conditioned his cast to listen really well. And so he's able to in a moment like that. And you even see it. Like, there's a moment when Scanlan tries to at least find a silver lining. Right? Sam tries. He tries to lighten the mood. And he says, is the guy who they killed for me, is he at least handsome? And then Matt says, well, it's a child. And Sam's like, oh, God. Because he didn't remember that. Or he hadn't caught that because he didn't understand what the scene was yet. And it was like, so it's like he tries. He's like, "Oh, can we find
he tries to
bring some levity to this?" And Matt's like, "Well, just a reminder." And Sam's like, "Oh, it's so much worse than I thought it was." But this is something too. Like, it is very hard to do dread because of table talk.
Yeah.
Because it is so easy for your cast to say, "Hey Dracula, you big fucking nerd, where's my fucking money?" You know, or to just start, you know, if they're confronting Straw, just to start doing like lines from other Dracula movies or from What We Do in the Shadows, and take the
100%.
piss out of the scene, or because they
Right.
want to recover some power.
Yeah.
You know, which
Yeah.
is a very, very human thing to want to do,
Oh,
and
yeah.
everyone tries.
Well, and you're not feeling the actual dread that your players would, or that your characters would be feeling. That's one of the things I just talked about during that Suntree episode, is I'm like, this town, Whitestone, the way that Matt is describing it, this would have already instilled that level of dread in the characters.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to instill that level of dread to get the players in the same mind space as their characters, you have to go extreme. Because the players are just inherently not going to feel that same intensity that the characters would legitimately be feeling.
Right. The other aspect to this that is, I think, really interesting from an actual play perspective is, and I can speak as someone who has tried to run one and has been a player on one for 3 years.
Yeah.
Dungeon crawls, the way like the Underdark style dungeon crawls, do not work in actual play. And like big asterisks, you can find exceptions. There's ways to do them well. There are future dungeon crawls in Critical Role, but like the level, like a mega dungeon of the form, like mega dungeons, I should say, really don't lend themselves well to the concept of actual plays. Because when all your character is doing in an episode is like exploring a room and looting treasure, you're not interacting with the NPCs that people came to watch you, especially something like Critical Role where the big emphasis is on characters and their interactions. You don't get, I mean, there's a reason we don't think anything interesting about Percy for most of the Underdark arc.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's not in an environment where his abilities can thrive, you know, which is kind of a challenge of mega dungeons in general, and which is why you want, you know, ideally more factions to interact with, but obviously that's a whole other, that's not really the issue at hand. The issue is that's a really difficult format.
Yeah. And
then what's the next adventure after that is monster hunts that have to be 2 episodes long because you only have the guest star for 2 episodes.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the next adventure after that? Political intrigue with vampires.
Yeah.
And now you have an adventure that actually lends itself really well to the format. And I don't think that was planned. I mean, Matt Mercer super does not care about what is good or bad for an actual play.
Yeah.
Like, that's not his concern.
Yeah.
His concern is what's more fun for the story. Some of these things he's had in his mind for ages. You know, he will do whatever. But I'm sure he cares. But, you know, he doesn't design them for, you know, for the most part.
Yeah.
He may design a dungeon to be done in a session, but he doesn't necessarily think about like, oh, how is this going to be for the audience? His audience is the 7 people at the table.
Well, and that's something that I want to ask you about as someone who has run actual plays and at home games. My not having run an actual play, my feeling that I've gotten, especially over the course of watching Critical Role, is that actual plays seem to just highlight issues, like existing issues with things.
Yeah.
I think that mega dungeons in general are incredibly risky for your games because they can be so boring so fucking quick. And that the actual play facet of it, I don't know that there's really anything unique about the actual play environment other than that it enhances those issues.
It depends. There are some things you can get away with at a table that you can't as easily at an actual play because you're investing everyone at the table. But and like honestly, combat is one of those things. Like I remember watching a video. Let me see if I can find the notes because I watched the video. I'm not gonna put the creators on blast because I don't know them from Adam. But I remember watching something and they were like, "Oh, here's how we would improve Critical Role," and I want to find like the list of the things that they would have changed because I wrote some of them down.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember, but it was all of it was like, oh, we wish we could see the dice that were rolling. Oh, I wish they would have like the pop-ups of the damage or whatever. And I was like, every note they had was about combat.
Gotcha.
Every single note they had was about making combat feel more like you're watching poker on the ESPN.
I mean,
and it was like, and by the way, that is not an invalid thing. I mean, watching, by the way, you know, Twitch is not the best format for actual play. Just
That's
full
fair.
stop.
Yeah.
Because Twitch is about jumping in live and you're missing so much context.
Yeah.
You know, you get away with it because Critical Role is Critical Role now. But
Yeah.
and it was the best venue they had at the time. But you know, Dimension 20 knows what Dimension 20 is by far and away. They have refined the formula, I think, in a lot of ways. Including by making it very clear early on that this is an anthology show, which gives them a lot of freedom that Critical Role is struggling with their if they want to change the cast, there's going to be a riot. If Dimension 20 wants to change the cast, they have a lot more flexibility to do that.
Yeah,
you know,
and I think that there is something to be said about there's kind of the difference between what is a good entertainment product and what is a good thing to watch with your friends. Which is sort of like kind of the inherent question of like, why do people watch bad movies? I'm not saying that Critical Role is a bad movie, but I do think that there's something to be said of watching something live with other people and being able to discuss it in the moment and have everyone's reactions in the moment, even if they're not addressing the chat.
Yeah.
Is kind of a level that Dimension 20 will never have, even though Dimension 20, their actual product is better, probably.
Yeah, it's a superior product.
Yeah.
Because they were able to iterate.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, I think Critical Role, in a lot of ways, is kind of like Lost. Because Lost changed TV.
Yeah.
But if you haven't seen it, it's a hard sell. Because it doesn't binge the way binge like shows designed to binge.
Yeah.
Binge. But it also is a hard show to do week to week now that you don't have the live interaction.
Yeah.
Like, it is a difficult show to get people back in because I tried showing it to people and my wife was like, "It's so slow."
It is really
and I was like,
slow.
I was watching it. I looked at her like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, this show is 18 years old.
Yeah.
And TV isn't paced this way anymore."
Yeah.
You know, you don't make 24 episode long seasons of mysteries anymore.
No.
That's just not how TV looks anymore.
Yeah.
So Critical Role has a lot of in comparison with that because like just because they did it and everyone tried to do it again, which is what happened with Lost as well. Everyone tried to recreate Lost and totally missed the point of what made it work, which was the characters.
Yeah.
And I think I don't think it's an accident. That's why a lot of similar actual play shows didn't work either, is because they didn't have the same charisma. You know, the big selling point early on, Critical Role also had the budget and it was owned by Legendary Entertainment, which was owned by Warner Brothers. So that they had some advertising budget behind them.
Yeah, that's fair, but I think I really
I drove
think
past billboards for Campaign 3.
Yeah.
Campaign 2. I drove past billboards for Campaign 2 before Critical Role went off on its own.
Yeah. Yeah. But I do think that it really was the people. Like, if I compare Critical Role and actual plays in general a lot to Minecraft. We used to have just 9-hour raw, unedited bullshit playthroughs. And the ones that succeeded in that era were the ones that had crazy good personalities driving them. And then we ended up getting hyper edited, really tight storylines, the like dream, like hunter shit, that I think is more related to Dimension 20.
Yeah.
And now I have my theories on what actual plays could succeed nowadays. I don't think anyone's making them, and I don't have any interest in running an actual play, but maybe we'll talk offline.
Oh, I don't really have the bandwidth. I have so many thoughts, and it would be... I honestly would be far more interested at this point in making, like radio drama style recaps of my games than I would for ever actually streaming or recording a game. Mainly because, like that would be so much more interesting to me because I've done the other. I've had a lot of fun doing the other. But, and I would have fun playing in a podcast actual play again. But like, I don't know. I would much more rather do story times at this point.
Oh, Mike, let's talk offline because I have thoughts and ideas.
But and there's part of it too is Critical Role was such the right product for the right time.
Yeah.
There was a reason why everyone who tries to live stream Critical D&D, that was Freudian. Everyone tries to live stream D&D uses a very similar visual format to Critical Role.
Sure.
Whereas Critical Role is still evolving their format. I think my favorite version of what they do during combat was a product of COVID. which was because they each had their own camera because they were socially distanced.
Right.
They all got to move everyone's individual camera to like a sidebar and just fill the map on screen.
Yeah.
They're not going to do that regularly, unfortunately, but they're still, the point is they're still experimenting with the best way to do this format.
Yeah.
And if you're going to, great. You have to keep iterating and kind of experimenting.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. There was so much that we wanted to include in this, so be on the lookout for part 2 coming very, very soon.